I'm Eloy Ortiz Oakley, President and CEO of College Futures Foundation, and you're invited to Opportunity Forum with College Futures. Hi, everyone. Today, we're discussing the implementation of a new California law requiring school districts to ensure that all high school seniors complete a free application for federal student aid. Many of us know that as the FAFSA, or the California DREAM Act application, and the future of financial aid across the nation. And I have two very special guests who I'll be talking to about this and who have spent many years in the struggle to make higher education affordable for everyone of all backgrounds. So today I have Jaclyn Piñero. She's the CEO of uAspire, and I also have Manny Rodriguez, who is the California Policy and Advocacy Director for the Institute of College Access and Success, otherwise known as TICAS. I want to welcome you both to Opportunity Forum with College Futures. Thanks for being here. Great. So we have lots to talk about, lots going on in the space, and we'll get into all of that and why this is so important. But let me begin by framing the conversation and why College Futures is even interested in this conversation. We believe that it is critically important that we lean into college affordability issues. We believe that a robust, proactive, and integrated system of supports that improves financial stability for all students is important to the success of our state. And to particularly to students who come from under-resourced communities, underserved backgrounds. Our state will only be successful if everyone can participate in a post-secondary experience and have the opportunity to get into the kinds of jobs that they want to see for themselves and that support their families here in the state of California. So with that frame, I want to get into some issues that are front of mind for a lot of us thinking about affordability. And I'll begin with you, Manny. Recently, a bill titled Assembly Bill 469 was signed into law, and we've been working to implement it. Can you tell us a little bit about, give us some background about AB 469 and what partners did you work with and were instrumental in getting that law passed?
Yeah, thank you very much once again for having me and for giving me an opportunity to talk about this very important issue. Big passion of mine, because if I'm being real, financial aid was the only reason why college was realistic and attainable for myself. So this has been a big passion point for myself, and excited to make this progress. So the law you referenced, Assembly Bill 469 by Assemblymember Eloy Ortiz, definitely worked in package with the governor's proposal within the budget, which were kind of moving along parallel timelines. And in my time with the Education Trust West, which is where I did this work and who the primary sponsors of that bill were, we did a lot of work on this, and it was a multi-year bill, right? The first year we tried it, it wasn't even scheduled for a hearing. I will say, the lessons we learned from that were very important. We allowed for the research to really guide the way we shaped that law. And we made sure that we uplifted how the pandemic itself had really disrupted FAFSA California DREAM Act completion. So the law itself, what it says, it is requiring high schools, county offices of educations, local education agencies to ensure that their students, 12th grade students, are filling out a FAFSA California DREAM Act. It also outlines opt-out provisions and kind of who will provide some of that technical expertise. And our key partners that really helped us understand how this can be done was California Student Aid Commission,
Mhm.
the Bright Spot School District of Valverde Unified School District, who was already doing this years before these bills went forth, because they really showed us that where there's a will, there's a way. It does count a lot on leadership, especially local level leaders.
Right.
But overall, we were very excited while I was at ETW to take this on, fight for this over a few years. And we definitely saw this as the first step, right? This isn't the silver bullet. This isn't going to solve everything. But it does begin to operationalize the process of filling out these forms, getting dollars to students, because we know
Mhm.
those dollars are critical for them to see college is realistic.
So before I ask Jaclyn a question, let me ask you to clarify something for our listeners, because some of our listeners may be from outside of California. Some of our listeners may not even know all the different forms of financial aid available. I think most people understand the FAFSA. Can you clarify the California DREAM Act and who would be getting that aid through the state of California?
Yes, to make that clarification. So the California DREAM Act is the in-state application that allows for undocumented students, AB 540 students, and other immigrant students
Mhm.
to access in-state financial aid. So this is not the Pell Grant. This is Cal Grant. This is Dream Loans, the Dreamer Service Incentive Program that is also ran through it, right? So it allows them to have the same or similar financial aid access as other students who are born in the U.S. And the California DREAM Act is critical because California really led the nation, not only in giving students access to aid, but also allowing them to pay in-state tuition and not be
Mhm.
charged out of state tuition, which is another key factor in that movement in supporting our undocumented immigrant students.
Well, thank you for that. It's I probably speak for all of us when I say hopefully we get to a point here soon where we're only talking about one form of financial aid for students of all background, rather than having to go state by state to support our dreamers or otherwise undocumented students. So let me pivot to you, Jaclyn. You've been keeping an eye on the implementation of AB 469. So tell us what's been the progress so far here in California on the implementation of this important piece of legislation?
Great question, and thank you again for having me. I would characterize California's progress on the implementation of AB 469 as diverse as is our state. There are, to double down on what Manny mentioned in terms of leadership and bright spots, there are many school districts that have been doing this work for a long time, even before there was legislation. And so there are, big tailwinds for those school districts, and they serve as models for other districts to see what's possible and see how powerful, now that the legislation is fully in place, can be for students and families. Kind of in the middle spectrum, you have a group of school districts and LEAs and county offices, et cetera, that understand the importance of the legislation and are doing great work to try to figure out how to comply with the legislative provisions in a continued resource constrained environment. And then you have school districts who, rightfully so, are still coming to understand what the legislation is, and even some school districts who have yet to actually know about it. So there is a broad spectrum of progress in terms of implementation to date.
Just doubling down on that question. So when you look at what's going on with implementation, and you mentioned that some school districts are certainly moving forward, and Manny mentioned one school district in particular that's done a lot of work even before AB 469. What does good implementation look like right now, do you think?
Sure. Good implementation looks like strong leadership at the school level, at the district level. We have so many amazing leaders, education leaders across California who have lived experience with using financial aid to ensure that they have the education to be in the leadership positions that they are in. So the power of the diversity of our leaders and the lived experience is really important, and I think plays a huge role in what is good happening around the state. Building a culture of post-secondary success is also very important. Being able to meet the student or the family where they are at and understanding what definitions of success means for them is critical, because it's not straight out of high school necessarily into a community college or a UC or a CSU. That isn't the reality for so many students and families. And so the ability to provide choice and information about what financial aid, by filling out these forms, what that can do, not only right after graduation, but for the long haul, if you need to come back in or et cetera. It is that knowledge transfer and the opportunity to have choice. Good implementation also looks like utilizing different budgetary resources like a local control plan, an LCAP, a district's education fund, using philanthropy to bring in additional services, because let's be real, if there were enough humans, counselors, organizations like uAspire on the ground already with students, we wouldn't need legislation to meet a 100% financial aid completion rate. So in the absence of budgetary dollars being supported through the AB 469 legislative process, districts have to find more money. They have to find more resources to bring in more services. And so good implementation also looks like, what are other mechanisms to use to bring in more resources to achieve the goals of the legislation?
What has been your involvement, your organization's involvement, uAspire's involvement in the implementation? And tell us a little bit about your organization. What is your focus?
uAspire, we are a national nonprofit focused on helping students identify post-secondary pathways and using the aid available to make those affordable. So we are headquartered in Boston. So Massachusetts is our home state, but we have a big presence here in California as well as New York. Those are our three home states, as we call them. And we are proud nerds as it comes to the technical implementation of financial aid. We are your FAFSA experts. And the way we do that is we sit with students and families every single day to fill out those forms, including the DREAM Act here in California. We help students and families understand when they get those aid offers, what does it even mean? Because right now, as you know, Eloy, you can't compare aid offers. So big efforts on standardization. We help to make those aid offers understandable and transparent. And we also help guidance counselors and practitioners also become better financial aid experts, because we can't be on the ground with every student. There is an incredible, amazing set of advocates out there as well that we help to train and build their expertise and skills. So in terms specifically here in California, to shout out the College Futures Foundation, you all supported us with an incredible 2-year pilot grant in partnership with TICAS and ETW and Next Gen Policy and CSAC. WestEd is helping us to do an analysis of that work, and the college CCGI is also California College Guidance Initiative is another one of our partners. So we came together and said, let's put a direct service pilot together, offer it to districts, and see what kinds of uptake we get with an additional scope of services to be provided.
Well, and you named quite a list of all-star organizations working together, so it's great to hear. So part of your explanation really hit on an issue that's really important to us at College Futures, which is centering the student in all of this, and how this particular piece of legislation and other efforts will improve the lives of students. So what would it mean for a student, in any neighborhood across the great state of California? What would it mean for them to have AB 469 implemented right? What would be the difference?
Well, we know from research that the completion of a FAFSA specifically, and I'll hold it to the FAFSA just for this particular research data point, is a very strong and one of the best predictors of whether a high school senior will go on to college. And so I'm citing some data from the National College Attainment Network, or NCAN, that seniors who complete the FAFSA are 84% more likely to immediately enroll in post-secondary education. And for students in the lowest socioeconomic quintile, FAFSA completion is associated with a 127% increase in immediate college enrollment. Just with that research and data that has been done over time, the data demonstrates how important AB 469 is for students across the state of California. And just to take it down one specific notch, it really also helps the state to achieve its goal of 70% certification, or post-secondary attainment. From an economic perspective, being one of the largest economies in the world, without an educated workforce, we will not achieve the economic goals that we have set as a state. And so this is a critical piece of legislation in so many ways, not only from the individual student perspective to achieve the goals that they have for themselves, achieve what changing the tide of intergenerational poverty as education can help to do. But also, again, all the way up to the state economic goals. This is such a pivotal strategy that we cannot take our eye off of. It's going to be a multi-year investment, and we must collectively keep our eye on this prize. But it is one that we can't begin to rest on our laurels to say, well, it's been a year. I'm sure school districts are doing fine. I'm sure families are figuring it out. Absolutely not. We have to stay the course.
Well, a lot of what you discussed in terms of the behavioral changes that you see in the research point to the importance of affordability, point to the importance of understanding that I, as a student, or I, as a parent of a student, can afford to go to college. So, Manny, you've done a lot of work around this question of affordability. The two organizations that you've worked for recently, and certainly the one you're at now, focuses a lot of time and attention on this question of affordability. What are you hearing from students on the ground? Because I know you're out there, you're in neighborhoods, you're talking to people. What are you hearing are the challenges with affordability, particularly here in California?
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And I know from TICAS's lens, right, this policy, this law, as well as a lot of other pieces we're working on are part of building that ecosystem that not only promotes the completion of these forms, but also maximizes the aid students can get and continue to get, right? This is very much something that you can see as an upstream, downstream piece, right? Upstream, when I mention that, I mean, right, how are students filling out these forms? What are the type of supports they need? If you're an undocumented student, mix that as family. What are the additional resources, trusted voices, assistance you need to fill out these forms, right? On the LEA level, how are they working with great groups such as uAspire, 10,000 Degrees, a lot of these organizations that are doing the work to build this upstream ecosystem of completion. But then you move downstream and you see that there's also work to be done there. And that's something we at TICAS are very excited to continue working on and expand on. So we know that when it comes to keeping aid, there's a lot of barriers after you complete a form that we need to address, whether that is verification, whether that is satisfactory academic progress, and making sure that those appeals processes or the permissible reasons that students can appeal are more student-centered. They're realistic. They're grounded in the student stories that students experience every day, right? And that's just part of keeping that aid because, as Jaclyn mentioned, very, very important to their success. Then on the back end, right, when you get further downstream, you start looking at how much aid are they accessing? Can this meet their total cost of attendance? And that's something that TICAS has been working on long before I joined and will continue to work on while I'm here, right? We know that over time, we've shifted this narrative to being less focused on tuition and fees and being more focused on some of those non-tuition costs and meeting the total cost of attendance for students. Eloy, you mentioned this a lot, right? At the community college system, they serve 100% of their students. And it's also the largest institution that serves the most low-income BIPOC students. Yet, when it comes to their financial aid, the most state aid at times that they can access, or the biggest amount they access, is the Cal Grant Access Award, which is still at 1648. Has not grown with inflation. If that did grow with inflation since its creation, it'd be somewhere in the $7,000 to $8,000 range.
So,
Eloy, can I add?
Yeah, go ahead. Please.
Is that okay? Can I add something? So, double, triple down on everything that Manny just said, of course. And one of the things that has become so much more clear out of the pandemic is this idea of your linear path out of high school into college. 4 years, put your head down, you come up, oh, I'm done. I can go now and have this long career. That is true for a very small percentage of California residents. Not the residents that uAspire focuses our resources on, including students who are the first in their family to go to college. I'm a proud first gen American as well. So first gen to college, coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and also identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. There needs to be on and off ramps built into post-secondary pathways that include 2-year, 4-year training, upskilling, reskilling. This concept of ecosystem not only needs to be strengthened on the technical financial aid side, but across all post-secondary pathways. And the ability for an individual to essentially stop for 4 years, 5, 6, however many it might take to get, let's say, a bachelor's degree, again, is not the norm. So how are we building a system where the money follows the student? And the student doesn't need to find the money in 2 years or when they're 27 or 32 and have a child maybe and are already working full time. The money needs to be following the student. And I really think that that is a vision and approach that we need to really think hard about. How do we create that in our state? So the burden is on the system, not the burden on the student.
I think you just recorded a commercial for College Futures. Because you just summarized exactly a lot of what we've been thinking about here. So I appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit more about affordability in the context of what's going on nationally, in other legislative efforts, both the state level and national level. And I'll begin by thinking about the headline that drove me crazy this week. There's usually several, but the one I just saw, I think it's the day before yesterday, was Stanford University raising their tuition and fees 7%. It will now cost over $60,000 to attend Stanford University. And of course, whether or not that means that other colleges and universities will see that as an opening to raise their fees and tuition, I think is just counterproductive to everything we're trying to do to make college more affordable, because the inflation we're seeing around tuition and fees just continues to outstrip our ability to access more aid for students from state and federal legislators. So, Manny, I know you've are taking a hard look at what's going on at the federal level and here at the state level. Anything on the horizon that you want to highlight for us about things that we should be paying attention to on the federal or state landscape in terms of affordability?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll start off by saying, right, when we're looking, especially at TICAS, we're looking at federal landscape versus California landscape. We have to acknowledge that it is very different. In California, we're able to dream big, but also accomplish big. While on the federal level, with a split Congress, with a debt ceiling conversation happening, right, we might be looking more towards progress, not perfection, or kind of ground softening work. But that said, that work has to continue moving forward at all times. So when it comes to the federal level, I think some of the pieces TICAS is really keeping an eye on. First one would be FAFSA simplification, right? This is a big piece that is going to impact millions of students and parents. For the most part, right? I think it's great that they're decreasing the amount of questions from 108 questions to 36, that they're better connecting the IRS tool, the change from an EFC to the state student aid index is very, very important, and will allow students and parents to better see kind of how much aid they could access ahead of time. It also accounts for the negative part, right? So we know some students, their EFC isn't just zero, meaning their family cannot contribute anything. It's actually negative. They help their family back at home. So this ability to now account for that with this new FAFSA simplification to be negative up to negative $1,500 is very important. And of course, the kind of final pieces on that one, it restores eligibility to incarcerated students, students with former drug convictions, and removes the selective service option. That's just some of the highlights on FAFSA simplification. We know that's important because it is going to touch on pieces here in California. That change from EFC to the student aid index, that will or is kind of will build on Cal Grant reform, which was codified, looking to be funded in 2024. I'll say the other big one that TICAS will continue to support and uplift a lot of our student partners in at the federal level is the double the Pell conversation, right? This campaign to increase the amount of aid for students should continue to be a North Star. While we haven't gotten the double, we have made progress, right? And that is a very, very good step for our low-income students and the federal aid they're accessing. And I really look at it, right? This North Star is similar to the narrative change TICAS has been talking about here in California when it comes to total cost of attendance versus tuition. You have to amplify that message. You have to change the narrative, because slowly but surely things will start changing. And double the Pell is going to definitely be that flag. But those are two of the biggest ones. I know there's a lot of other pieces, and I'll see if I missed any that Jaclyn wants to mention.
Yeah, well, I'll mention one that's important to me, and I know your boss at TICAS knows how important it is to me, which is the America's College Promise. Eliminating the cost for the first 2 years of a post-secondary experience, I think, is a critical piece to get more students to take that step. So I'm still hopeful that this administration will pull that rabbit back out of the hat and we'll have another shot at it. So Jaclyn, any other pieces that you want to highlight that are going on at the federal level that you think are important?
Always more to add to the list. The one I will add is the recent report out of the Government Accountability Office, or the GAO, around simplification and transparency of the financial aid offers. And so I alluded to this before, but when a student applies to a few colleges and then they get their aid offer back, it is not an apples to apples comparison. And so with the powerful GAO report that came out, and there's been a task force that has been created around that, uplifting recommendations in that report for institutions of higher education to begin to implement is very pivotal. uAspire did a report a few years ago, decoding the cost of college. We have our own set of recommendations around transparency and aid offers. But what it really, again, comes down to is providing a student and family choice. Power in the knowledge of total cost of attendance, as Manny has been talking about. What does this mean? What is a grant? Most people don't understand the technical definition of a grant. Parent Plus, what is that? Unsubsidized, subsidized. I mean, the lack of consumer protections around this choice that is one of two biggest outside of purchasing a home that an individual will make in their lifetimes is something that we need to continue to focus on. And this will give the legs that it needs from the federal side to push states and institutions to do so much more. California is ripe as in many ways to model what successful standardization can look like. Many student experiences here, it's community college to a CSU or a UC and back, and all of that movement needs to be made transparent. And I implore the state to be one of those leaders and to use the federal guidelines and this task force, and let's get to it.
So that's a great segue to our last question, which I'm going to pose to each of you as we begin to wrap up. Given your work here in California, you all have been watching the discussions around the governor's recent budget. What advice would you have for policymakers here in California? What are the top couple of things you think they should really push on, or ensure get implemented to help students better afford their post-secondary education? I'll start with you, Manny, then I'll give Jaclyn the final word.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question, because here in California, I have an endless list of priorities. I'll say I think the top line one was really talked about this past Tuesday at an Assembly Budget Sub 2 hearing. So the Legislative Analyst Office, the LAO, brought up a point where they kind of framed this discussion on, Cal Grant reform has the trigger for implementation in 2024. So if there's enough money, it will go into effect. They alluded to that, the economic situation isn't looking too good. You also have these one-time dollars for the middle class scholarship, and we're looking to build up middle class scholarship 2.0. And the way they framed it was almost like the legislature needs to choose which one to invest in, because it's going to be hard to accomplish both. And for me, and I would say for TICAS as well, the priority there should be Cal Grant reform, right? When California always talks about being this progressive beacon on the hill, leading the way, we need to really lead with how we're prioritizing our budget. When it comes to middle class scholarship, no one's denying that middle class families are also facing pressure, right? I think it's across the board. And middle class 2.0 can really start building some of those pieces out. But before we look towards middle class scholarship 2.0 as being like this bridge to fix everything, we really need to look at it as like an affordability pledge and inspect key pieces of it, right? Who is it serving? Right now, it leaves out community college students completely, and it prioritizes UC CSU. What is the financial need component, right? It's a last dollar program. So if a student was to get emergency aid or something else, that has to be factored into this complex formula, and and there's also the self-coverage part. And one of the things TICAS has always talked about, if you were a higher income student, middle income student, your parents went to college, you have the social capital, the network, that self need might be easier to cover than if you're a first generation low income student who has to work more hours,
Right.
has to borrow, has to attend less than full time, right? So we need to shift middle class scholarship to be more of an affordability pledge, to be more equitable. And for us, that starts by first investing in Cal Grant reform, then moving that over. But I think that would be my biggest recommendation for legislators in California right now.
That's great. Well, so Jaclyn, any thoughts from you? What advice would you have to us in California about how we can improve the situation for students?
As always, 100% agree with Manny on staying the course on Cal Grant reform. There's been progress has been made, and still so much more must be made. But by continuing to focus on that, it just continues to model how California is prioritizing the importance of education across all individuals in the state in an equity framework. So, and the other thing that I would add to the list, if I had to choose, would continue to fund or place dollars into a line item that would support the AB 469 legislation. I know there are some funds being potentially directed to the California Student Aid Commission for implementation. Fantastic, keep that moving. However, it is not enough to ensure that the $550 million that is left on the table in financial aid each year in California alone is going to be taken up by just the legislation as it's written. More resources need to be provided to that work as a down payment. As soon as the systems are created and the expertise is transferred, the investment into that work might not need to be necessarily ongoing in perpetuity, but it is important that dollars are placed early on as the legislation is going into its second year to ensure that the resources and the support structures are put in place to uptake all of those federal dollars that are available.
That's great advice. And I really appreciate this conversation with the two of you. This has been great. A lot of great ideas, great feedback, great information about what's going on, and also a great call to action on how much work still needs to be done. And hopefully working together with you all, with our partners throughout the state and across the country, we can continue to make significant progress and support our low-income and middle-income students so that they can achieve the dreams that they want to achieve for themselves, their families want to achieve for themselves, which is completing a post-secondary education. So, all right. Well, I want to thank Jaclyn and Manny once again for joining me on this episode of Opportunity Forum with College Futures. This is a conversation space with innovators and influencers like those that I just spoke to in and around public higher education, working to help students move onward and upward. So don't forget to follow us on Instagram, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for joining us.